Yo, what is going on, guys? It's TechT here. Are you ever tired of the normal Windows boot logo while booting up your PC every single time and wondered if you could replace it with your own custom boot logo? Well, today we are going to be taking a look at a cool piece of software called HackBGRT. And with this application, you could change the default Windows or any other OEM boot logo into your own custom boot logo. And before we get started, just a fair warning, do this at your own risk because HackBGRT modifies a part of the system UEFI partition, which is used for a computer to boot using UEFI. So if you accidentally damage your EFI partition, you could render your system unbootable. Myself or HackBGRT is not responsible for any damage, and the software comes with 0% warranty. And this video is for educational purposes only. And with all that out of the way, let's start today's video. Now, the first step is to check the requirements. So, you need an UEFI or Unified Extensible Firmware Interface-based system. To check if you have UEFI or not, press Windows plus R on your keyboard, and a run window should pop up. And in that run box, you want to type in msinfo32 and hit enter. And now a system configuration window will pop up. Now here, find the BIOS mode item. Now the value should be UEFI, or if it tells legacy, this method would unfortunately not work for you. And second off, you want to disable secure boot. To do that, press and hold the shift key on the keyboard and restart your computer. Now instead of rebooting into your operating system, it's going to pull up this, and this is known as WinRE or Windows Recovery Environment. Now in this screen, head over to Troubleshoot and Advanced Options. Now you want to hit the UEFI firmware settings button and hit Restart. Now you're going to be presented with your UEFI firmware settings. Now each motherboard is going to have different menus and design layouts. So let's be common here. In most firmware settings, just by the security tab, uncheck or disable the secure boot. And if the steps that I'm saying doesn't match with your computer's UEFI firmware setting, search up for a tutorial on how to disable secure boot on that particular motherboard manufacturer's UEFI firmware settings. Now hoping that you have the requirements, let's move on to the next step. You want to download HackBGRT from the link in the description. Now here, head on to the releases section and download latest version as a zip file. And now you should be able to download a zip file containing the content of HackBGRT. You just want to extract the HackBGRT folder from that zip file. And now it's time to create your own custom boot logo. And if you already have one, we have to make a little bit of modifications to it. Any transparent parts of your image should be replaced with solid plain black. And your image should be a 24-bit bitmap file. But most of the images are in PNG or JPG file format. And if yours isn't a 24-bit BMP file, open that image up in MS Paint and save it as a 24-bit BMP file. And just like that, now you should have a BMP file. Now you want to rename your file into Splash. This is really important. Now copy a Splash image that is just created into the root of the HackBGRT folder that we extracted previously. Now hit replace the files in destination. Now what we're doing is replacing the HackBGRT stock image with your own custom boot logo. I'll explain later on in this video why are we doing this. Now open up the HackBGRT folder and run the setup.exe file. And click yes on the user account control prompt. Now a command prompt window should pop up with some content in it. Now there are two options, I to install and C to cancel. We want to install the program by hitting I on the keyboard. Now a notepad window will open up telling you about the configuration, but sadly it didn't show up to me because I accidentally uninstalled the notepad app, because Windows 11 lets you do that.
Damn Microsoft.
Now close out of the notepad window, and this time a paint window should open up. And this is where things can get confusing and risky. I'll walk you through it as much easy as possible. HackBGRT mounts your system EFI partition and replaces the default boot logo with the Splash file that we have replaced before. And if you haven't replaced the splash.bmp file, your default Windows boot logo will be instead replaced with the default stock HackBGRT logo. And there is still a workaround if you didn't replace the Splash file. But I think this method is a lot easier for you to do and for me to explain. But anyway, to double check that the Splash image has really applied, hit File, open in your MS Paint window. Now in the Paint window that pops up, go into this PC and your EFI partition should be mounted as the A or B drive. In my case, it's the A drive. And as you can see here, you couldn't access the partition anywhere outside MS Paint. So just go to the unmounted EFI partition in the MS Paint window and find the EFI folder, then the HackBGRT folder. And the root of the HackBGRT folder, make sure that it's your splash image that exists there. Now close out of the Explorer window without doing anything, and do the same to the Paint window. And now the command prompt window will inform you that the HackBGRT installation was successful. Now do what it says and press any key on the keyboard to get the hell out of the window. And now reboot your computers to see your customized boot logo in place of your ugly, disgusting Windows or OEM logo. All thanks to HackBGRT and the developer who designed HackBGRT for making this risky and really tough process tremendously easy and less risky, kind of. And it's just as easy to remove your custom boot logo and go back to the standard Windows logo, just in case if you change your mind. Now open up the setup.exe file just like before and hit yes on the UAC prompt. Now instead of 2 options, there are going to be 4 options. I'm not going to go through all the options, but the obvious ones are: remove the HackBGRT folder in the EFI folder of your EFI partition. Hit R on your keyboard to remove the HackBGRT folder in the EFI folder in your EFI partition. And then again, the CMD window will inform you the process has been successfully done. And again, do as it says, press any key to get the hell out of the window. And just like that, now you should see a standard Windows logo every single time you boot up your PC. So alright guys, that's all for today's video and for this awesome program. So hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons for more videos like this. And also comment down below if you have any queries or any ideas for my future upcoming videos. And just thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.